Hello, everybody. Adam Parks here with another episode of Receivables Roundtable. Today, my guest is Mr. Marc Savage from Emprise Technology, which is an organization within the receivable space and really the technology space in general, with a lot of expertise in the collections arena. So how you doing today, Marc?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I have to say that, our kind of pre-show conversation today is one of the more interesting that I've had over the past couple of weeks. So really excited to kind of jump into it with you today. I know we got a lot of things to cover. So why don't we just kind of kick it off? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Sure. I started Emprise 20 or so years ago. I started out in the receivables management industry back when it was called the collections industry. So it was, a little simpler to understand. I started out at the Credit Bureau of Toledo and worked there for a while, and then worked for a company in Baltimore that gave me a greater lift to understand what needed to happen, and then saw this real need to deal with data integration and feeding the beast. I've always believed that data is the real artery that brings work into an agency and comes from a first party. And we started down the path of enabling companies to do that. And first we wanted to just write data interfaces to get the data in. And our client said, well, yeah, that's great, but we need help with our system too. So we got involved in that. And then later they said, our receivables management system works well. We need some help with some of our business processes. And we said, well, okay, I guess we'll do that too. We did that. And so the path has been a winding one, like it is for every business professional, I suppose. But we're the company that is a high contact. We take a lot of time to understand the needs of our clients. We understand the context in which they work and can talk to them about that. And then we do the technology work. I tell people that 10 years ago, 80% of the work that we did was actual development work. We'd be creating something, we'd be writing something. I bet it's less than 50% now. We spent all this time talking and thinking and strategizing and testing and validating, and there's so much wraparound to the actual work that we do because the magic is in actually delivering what's needed in the right way and taking all the other considerations into place. And so we're the people who take the time to do those things correctly.
Tech problem solver is what I hear, right? Like you guys come in and you fix problems, system integrations, enhancements, those kinds of things. It's interesting to hear about that evolution, which actually leads me to kind of my first question for you, which is, as we look at the current environment and we look at, COVID, I started this series because people were all of a sudden using cameras and microphones, right? And having these video chats. And if I had tried to execute on this on 2019, I don't think anybody ever would have come on this series. But now that technology has evolved, I'm seeing companies adapt or adopt new technology at a pace that I've never seen before. And I'm curious to hear what you guys are seeing on your side in terms of the pace of adoption of new tech.
Well, I think the pace of adoption is pretty spectacular, but that's not COVID related. There's been this real move towards realizing that the old technology and the old solutions that were needed to meet the market needs aren't fitting anymore, and everybody's known that. I mean, we've been restricted by the legislation that's kept us to letters and phone calls forever, and now if somebody calls you on your cell phone, you don't answer. So that makes it really hard for a third party agency to be effective. So there was this push to find new technologies, and certainly that was and to the tune of omnichannel communication. So they wanted to be able to finally text and reach consumers and use emails to reach consumers more effectively, and also create more of a two-way conversation than it had been happening in past. But that was starting. Now what's happened is that shifted into really high gear. And it shifted in high gear, certainly I think catalyzed by COVID and the scattering of everybody's staff to home, which has been a huge challenge for everybody. But that's really been catalyzed, and we're finding ourselves pretty much the busiest we have ever been. And it's because this new technology is coming in and it's needed. It's gone from, oh, that's kind of a cool idea, to, hey, nobody's answering our calls anymore. We need something new, and we need it
Evolution
now.
from necessity.
It needs to work. And that technology is evolving really rapidly. Like if you use, say, Zoom, or you use any of the other services, the service you're using now is not the same as the service you started with at the beginning of COVID. There are all these additional features. It works better, and that's just the part that you see. There's all this other stuff behind the scenes that's changed massively. And so that's an exciting time. But to kind of sum it up, this is the time where these technologies become real. And when these technologies become real and start being widely adopted, what we're going to see is that these technologies become a lot better quicker, because the first rounds of those technologies that we saw, in the past 3 or 4 years, they weren't very good. They kind of worked. There are all these yeah buts, right?
Sure.
And if there's ever a new technology, it's loaded with yeah buts. And you can't go to sleep well at night if you're head of an operation with lots of yeah buts. Those are the kinds of things that keep you from sleeping. And as those are being more widely adopted, those are becoming bigger and bigger issues. And there's a lot, and the integration and orchestration of all that is also really complex right now. And the idea that, oh yeah, well, I want to text, and I want to be able to decide one day if I'm sending this person a physical letter, or I'm sending them an email, or I'm sending that in a text. What has to happen in order to be able to do that? Right? I mean, it's yeah, you want to do it. Great. I understand it. And I know you think you should be able to do it, but how does your system of record allow for that to happen, so that you can track it, and you can make that change, and you can authorize that change, and you can deal with the consequences of that? If you send out a text, you should expect a text in response, right? Are you ready to take one? I mean, think about, it's the Pandora's box.
It's a lot of moving parts. But as we talk about text messaging and kind of that side of the world, right? Like, one of the things that we've seen is a shift towards that consumer focus, right? Like, everything be about the agent, and now we've started to move more into that consumer focus. So with the projects that you've been working on, how have you seen that evolution come to life?
Well, that's the underlying catalyst, Adam. I mean, the real piece that we're seeing is this shift from the account representative and collection system focus. So this is what the organization wants to make sure is working really well, to a focus on consumer empowerment and consumer engagement and that piece. And we have a really forward-looking client who've been talking about this for the last couple of years, and I thought, well, these guys are way out there. They're the only folks that are doing that. And then I started listening around and found everybody's talking about this. And it's necessitated or needed because nobody answers their phone and nobody reads their mail anymore. It's one that the technology, the solution promotes this other evolution towards this consumer engagement, consumer experience. An agency and the first party that provided those accounts, they want to reach out to that consumer in the least demanding way rather than the most demanding way, like they used to before. And they want to reach out to that consumer in the way the consumer wants to engage. So they know the consumer doesn't want to talk to a person. They know the consumer wants to use their phone to hit a website that has great validation to give them comfort, a good user experience for that, and the ability to, create a payment arrangement, but to find out what the whole story is. So if they got a PL95 letter, and now they got to figure out what to do with it, the first thing they want to do is not talk to anybody, but it would be great if they could go to some place and figure out what the deal is. Oh yeah, this is when we went to the hospital and
Yeah.
the insurance paid this amount, and we weren't going to pay this piece because it was some x-rays and we didn't even know that anything happened. So we just said, some make up.
Whatever the situation is. I mean, there's legitimate reasons.
Right. And they want to be able to get that information and get that background before they even engage with somebody. And if they get that information and the balance seems, if everything seems right and the balance seems like something that doesn't make them crazy, then they're going to engage right away and start solving that problem. And what's even more interesting is they may want some more information. And in the past, they've absolutely had to talk to an account rep at an agency to get clarification. They've had to have a conversation like that. And they do not want to have that conversation. I don't want to have that conversation.
People
I
want self-serve options. I mean, look,
yeah, exactly.
I got a restaurant downstairs here, right? And if I could order online, I'd probably eat there, 5 times a week. But because I can't order online and physically have to go down there, Uber Eats is getting some of my business.
Right, exactly. I've got 4 relatively small children. My youngest is 6 and my oldest is 12. So it's crazy in my world. And my oldest has discovered Chick-fil-A, which he
yes. We're going down the street. I totally understand.
The part I hate about it is I drive up and I've got to do an order for 6 of us now. The very thought of that makes my spine tingle and my skin crawl. I'm going to have to negotiate all the orders in the car and figure out what's going to be, and we're going to have to say a prayer to make sure that it's right, because small people cry when their food isn't right. Adults kind of soldier along. Small people cry, and they're very loud when they do it. So you have to make it right. Their solution was to just have an app, and you pick all the food, and it kind of takes a little longer the first time, but the second time you say, hey, you want the same thing you got last time? Right. That's yes. Right.
That's yes and child.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's okay. I'm going to get you the same thing. You order up the same thing. You show up. They bring it out to you. That's it. It's amazing. So the empowerment of technology to make that people-less engagement is amazing. But we're just getting there. It's there. All the technology is available to you, but it's very challenging to integrate with your system of record, and it's only okay. There's lots of yeah buts still in it, and
I think you're gonna have to trademark that phrase. I like it because it's a very true statement, right? And I've spent a fair amount of my career in technology development and building platforms, and but is probably the most common phrase in that process.
Yeah.
So if you ever make T-shirts, I will proudly wear one.
Gotcha. Sounds like a plan.
So, as we kind of talk about the evolution of all these things and kind of where we're going from a consumer standpoint, right? Like somebody's got to execute on these things. And, from my experience, like some of my greatest achievements in this space have come from having partners where there's a great balance between the intersection of technology and business understanding, because so many times you have IT guys that they're great IT people, right? They're great builders, but they don't necessarily understand the details of the business needs. And then you have on the flip side, you have people that understand the business needs very deeply, but couldn't turn on their computer. So, how have you kind of addressed some of that, and where do you see kind of the evolution of that roller position within an organization where people live at that intersection of technology and business knowledge?
Well, those people have always been really valuable, and we sort of founded this company to provide those people that stood in the gap between business process. I mean, there really are several layers. There's the business requirements and the business process associated to just run the business. And then the next tier are the systems that are in place to execute that. and how they run and how they maintain them. And then below that, there are the tools that are used to configure the systems and to make all the pieces talk together. That's kind of like the plumbing. And that's the part that nobody wants to deal with. But if you're to talk about a system conversion, say, 70% of a system conversion to go from, let's say, one receivables management system to another, 70% of the work involved in it is plumbing. It's data integration and reports and all that kind of stuff. So we realized that we weren't going to be big enough to be able to have people that were good at the business and good at the technology. So we thought, well, let's just get people that are good at both. And it turns out that that's impossible. But you can get people that are really good at the technology and have good people engagement skills, and you can grow them over a long time. So we find that we don't have a really good employee, a really good, effective employee that can engage and be really involved with a project with lots of autonomy until they've worked for us for 4 or 5 years. And that's marinating in work from, like, we work for about 100 different clients every year. So it's like the best case scenario. And it takes that long.
It's a lot of differences between 100 different clients, right? Like
Yeah,
there's a lot
right.
of nuances that
You
have to be
see all this stuff,
learned.
and you're also surrounded by all these other people who know more stuff than you, and you just kind of grow up in it. So I guess who we really are as a company is we're a company that's invested over time through the good grace of our clients that have given us lots of fuel to burn, basically, meaning work to do and problems to solve. That's been fuel for our folks to develop, and the vast majority of our staff, 60, maybe 70% of our staff are beyond that experience.
On that time
are
level.
4 or 5 years, and that's why we can do stuff. And we're seeing with our clients, they're in exactly the same boat, but the pace of technology evolution, most of them thought, well, I've got this receivables management platform, and it's a pain and it's hard, but it's the heart of my business. I mean, it makes everything work.
Literally the heart.
Yeah. And now there's this shift to say, oh, you've got to build a web-based platform that people can use on their phone, and it's going to integrate real-time texting with my staff and maybe with a bot that deals with that. And we're going to have lookups into the system of record that is secure. So we're going to have validation on it. We got to build this. It's not that we got to build a whole other system. Yep, that's kind of right.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so they're suddenly, our clients are suddenly real thin on people who have that, 4 or 5 plus years experience. They all have some, but
But how many do they really? Yeah,
they just
it's a tough balance, right?
They
like
just
finding
don't
that
have enough. Yeah,
perfect
this is
intersection.
Like, I was just starting out in technology for the millennium. And everybody was really worried about, I mean, back then, dates used to be 6 digits. It was cool, right? Because nobody ever worried about it, right? It was a huge thing, man.
The pre-Y2K
right?
days.
Yeah, right? So back then, companies just had this huge gear up to deal with that. They're experiencing a real similar thing right now. This shift to user experience feels a lot like Y2K. They've got to have all their other stuff running, and they've got to get this new stuff running. So everybody's working long hours out there. But the problem is you can't hire people. You can't hire new folks that you're going to train to do this because you don't have 4 or 5 years. And we've tried to fast track people, and
there's nothing that speaks to experience like experience, right? Like it's something that you can never really fake. It's either something that you've earned or you haven't yet. It's either something that you've earned or you're earning. I like that one.
Right. And our new folks, we always have a class of new folks. I think their path to learning is steadily eased by every other layer of all these experienced people, because we've all been through it and we're evolving. And even though the work we're doing now, I bet, is maybe a factor of 10 harder than the work we were doing 20 years ago. It was easy. I think about that stuff. I'm like, people paid us to do that? I mean, it was hard then, but
I
now it's like, oh my gosh, that was super easy. Versus all they want us to do is the hard stuff now. And so those new guys are in a spot to do the hard stuff right out of the gate because it's all hard stuff.
Yeah, and it's what we're being taught now, right? Like building websites in HTML, old school hard coded sites versus
Yeah.
responsively designed content management systems like WordPress today is two
Yeah.
very, very different animals. And
it's completely
I've
different.
been coding that whole time, so I've been kind of riding that wave and doing that from a marketing standpoint across the space in terms of kind of managing that process. But wow, Mark, I feel like we're going to have to do another session too because we're about out of time here, and I have so many more questions that I want to jump into. But I think that I'm going to have to ask you to be a recurring guest because this has been just such an interesting conversation. And for those of you that are watching, I just met Mark like at the beginning of the hour before we started filming was kind of our first conversation. And this has really just been interesting and intriguing the whole time. I had to stop us and turn on the camera to make sure that we recorded something today because we were getting so into depth on the future of technology. And so I'll save my best question for another date, which is to talk about kind of what's the next communication mediums that are coming down the pipe, right? Because you and I could probably go on about that for a good hour on its own. Maybe that's a webinar in the near future.
It's an exciting question and one I would love to talk about more.
I think so too. So for now, I want to really, I appreciate you coming on, and I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I've learned a lot about yourself, your organization, and honestly, given me a lot to think about from a technology perspective as I look at our industry and its evolution over the next, call it 5 years. So thank you so much for participating.
Oh, hey, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed this conversation greatly. It's not very hard to get me going, but the engagement and the insight of the questions that we're talking about, it's what people need to be talking about. So it's cool. We seem to be
it's
really
fun
on the
if
way.
you're a nerd like us.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Like this is what we're all
time. Oh, data, I love it. Right. Yeah, exactly.
For those of you that are watching, feel free to leave a comment below. Mark or myself would be happy to engage in any questions, comments. Feel free to share this content. We always love a good share. Or if you have any other guests that you'd like to see us interview or topics that you'd like to see us cover, feel free to comment below and we will get to those just as quickly as we can. But until next time, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you again soon.